Alright, so today I want to talk about tracking snake information and some of the new ways I've come up to track some of this information. If you have a pet snake or if you have breeders, there's a lot of information to track. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, I used to track every single thing. I actually had a notebook, and every time a snake would shed, I'd write it in the book. Every time it would go to the bathroom or eat a rodent or I'd change the substrate, I'd write all this information down. And it's kind of interesting that I ended up after the first year with a whole book of information that I didn't really even go back and use, and I felt like it was just kind of a tedious exercise writing all this information down in a book, especially something like sheds, because you know the shed on a snake, it's kind of random. It depends how much they eat. The more they eat, the more they shed. And I pretty much got to the point where if I'm going to track some information, I want to be able to use that information one way or another. I want to use that information to take action to help the snake or to work through a problem or an issue. And a lot of times, a lot of the information that you track is not really useful, like the sheds and when do they go to the bathroom and stuff like that. It was kind of interesting because, you know, even through the years, I was kind of struggling trying to figure out how to track a lot of this information, especially when it comes to feeding ball pythons. And I used to track every single food, you know, and sometimes I got to the point where I'd actually weigh the rodent before I would feed, and then when they actually ate, I'd write it down. And then I found pretty much after tracking a lot of this information that I didn't really use that information in order to, you know, essentially it comes down to you really can't do anything. If a snake doesn't eat, you really can't force feed the snake. So I got to the point where I wasn't really tracking any information, and then I kind of got out of control where I didn't know what snakes were eating and what snakes weren't eating. And then I kind of went to the binder clip method. You can kind of see that behind me in the rack. And essentially what it is I take these little binder clips and I clip it on the tub every time I feed a rodent. And every time they eat a rodent, I put a little clip on there. So at a quick glance, I can look at my rack and I know instantly who's eating and who's not eating. And what I would do is I'd go through and I get to the point where I'd have like 5 or 6 or 7 clips on some of these tubs. And then I go through and I take it all down and I'd start over and start with, you know, the ones that would eat. The problem is I really couldn't get an overview as far as like a whole year in review as far as what snakes were eating. So I came up with this other method. I just kind of came up with it. I think I'm going to kind of go away from the binder clip method and go to a note card method. I made up this note card. I've never really seen anyone do this. I've seen some note cards like this, but the problem is with a lot of these note cards, I've seen a lot of people, what they'll do is on every single line, they'll write the date, they'll write the rodent weight, and it's in order to really know what's going on in your whole rack, you have to actually look really close at the card and look at all the dates and try to figure out, you know, it's a little more mental work. And I kind of came up with this quick read method where I put the whole year on one binder card. So if you take a look at this, it's really simple. It just says every month, and then under every month it has a blank spot. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to get little, actually just ordered them from Amazon, little holders for these cards. And I'll put the card right on the front of every tub. And I got some double-sided tape that I can tape the holders right on the tub. And essentially what I'm going to do is every time I feed, every time they eat, I'm going to put a little check mark on the month for that feeding for that snake. So essentially what I can do is I can walk right up to a tub, I can look at the card, and at a glance I can see what they've eaten in the last 12 months, how many times they've eaten. Of course, you kind of have to work your way through the year. So in January, you don't really know the history before that, but you get a few months behind you and you can actually see what the snake has eaten over the last few months or the entire year. And sometimes they'll eat really heavy for a certain amount of time, and then especially if you're breeding females, they'll stop and they won't eat for months and months. And I think it's kind of handy, instead of pulling out your book and digging through all the dates and everything, just have a little quick reference card where you can just look at it really quick and go, oh yeah, that snake has eaten several rodents 3 months ago, and you kind of know the update and the status of the snake without actually having to pull the book out and everything. And the other thing is I wanted something not only that was easy to read, but that was really easy to document when I'm going through. And that's one of the big things. If I'm going through and I'm feeding 100 snakes, it almost takes me longer to go through my book and write everything down, the date and the size and the feeding and everything. And then it kind of gets lost in this huge book, this huge table of all this information. And it's hard to take the information down, and it's hard to reference it at a glance. So this is kind of an easy way to actually, have the information on a card, and I can just glance at my rack. And it's been working really good for my hatchlings. Essentially with the binder clip method, what I've been doing is I'll start with, essentially what I'll do is the first time they eat, I'll put a clip on their tub, and then every time they eat, especially from a hatchling, you always want to get them to at least 6 meals before you sell them, because it's really difficult to get the first 6 meals into them usually. And then I actually had these little like magnetic strips that are printed out, and then I'd put them right on the tub. If they've eaten 6 meals, I'd actually mark that tub as eaten 6+ meals, and I wouldn't really track the information from there. And what I was really doing is I was going by the body conditions. So when I'd go through and spot clean or give them water, and one of them was underweight a little bit, I'd put a binder clip maybe on the left side to mark all the underweight ones. And then if I had a couple of rodents left over, I'd kind of focus on the underweight ones, give them another rodent or two. And I kind of do that with all my snakes, really go by body condition instead of the number of rodents that I feed. But the problem is I have some snakes that are lagging behind so far, and I haven't really documented that well as far as, how many rodents that they've eaten in the last year. I used to document really good, but then I kind of went to this binder clip method, and I'd say it works good in the short term, but it's not really good for the long term. So this is kind of like a compromise between taking down a whole bunch of information and doing a really quick kind of a binder clip method, going with the note card method. I think it's going to work really good. Alright, so it is time for the question of the day. And Hydrovision asks, what do you use to label your snakes on your snake rack? And that is a very good question. I actually just pulled one off here. And essentially what I use is, I actually just kind of made this up a long time ago. I've been using it ever since. What it is it's a magnetic tape. Comes in a roll, and you can unroll it, and then on the magnetic tape, I put a label that I made on my label maker. I actually have a Brother P-Touch label maker, and it fits perfectly. It's a 1/2-inch label on a 1/2-inch magnetic tape, and I can put basically anything I want on there. And what I put on there is I put all the genes for the snake and the year that it was born, which is, it's kind of nice to have all the genetics right on the snake rack. So if something happens to me and someone's wondering what to do with all my snakes, they can come in and they know just at a glance everything, all the genetics, the year it was born, and everything right on my snake rack. It's really handy. And I'd say this is probably one of the best things that I've used. I use these on my snake racks and on my rodent racks. It's pretty awesome. This, in addition with those feeding cards, I think it's going to be a fantastic combo. So I'm actually going to leave you with some footage of my drone. I was actually testing my drone out today, and what I did is I actually put it in active track mode. It's supposed to lock onto you and then fly towards you and around you and track you without running into anything. And let me tell you, it was a challenge. I actually ran through my driveway and the forest and a bunch of stuff. I actually had some problems a couple times. My drone got stuck and didn't know where to go, and then one time I actually crashed my drone. Luckily, it still flies. It wasn't any serious damage on that, but you can actually see the crash on this video. I'm gonna leave you with some of that footage. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.